things got lost so quickly in the cycle of news. Things just come and go so quickly until Doge started unraveling all the spending.
Right.
And you start seeing things like $200 million allocated to transgender experiments on monkeys.
Right.
You're like, what the fuck? Like, this is crazy. And that's just a tip of the iceberg. And then the NGOs, and then that map of 50,000 NGOs that was essentially just Democratic propaganda machine that was exposed, that was all just money being funneled in a circular manner.
Totally. I mean, it's been exhilarating. There's a sort of I understand the weight of history here. We are doing open heart surgery on the body of the American empire, our influence abroad, and it has to be done well. And so, I want to help the American homeland, and so this is a sensitive process, but obviously, it's been a bit surreal seeing the past couple weeks where people are now. I go to my X timeline and I see everyone doing the same exercise that I gave up everything to be doing 8 years ago. Going into, because all this stuff is open source. You didn't need to be an inside guy to see this. If you knew where to look, these are usaspending.gov. I used to joke is the main difference between, or was, I think, until freedom opened up when Elon acquired X and a few institutional changes began to happen, in the government and with Congress. But, I used to joke that usaspending.gov was the main difference during the height of this censorship, total control era, was the main difference between us and Russia and China, which was that we have this sort of autocratic control over information and institutions by the U.S. government. So do they. The difference is we can go to usaspending.gov and look up how they do it. So when I've been going to my X timeline and seeing everybody independently doing that exercise and finding the joy in that, the self-discovery process, and being able to share it with people and everybody being able to understand and make sense of the receipts because, this framework for understanding it has been shared and popularized. That to me has been the goal all along, to be able to give people the language and the frameworks to understand what is so terrifying and necessary to reform, but that's right there, in front of your eyes if you only open your eyes to see it.
It's got to be exciting, though, for you to be there on Operation Day when they are doing the open heart surgery.
It is. We need to make sure that the patient doesn't die, on the operating table.
Right.
Just because it's the right move to do the open heart surgery because the patient needs it, doesn't mean that the operation goes well if the operating surgeons don't know the anatomy of the organ they're operating on. And so that I see right now as sort of my prime function, is to just teach more and more of the anatomy of the organ so that the people who are operating on the patient, the American homeland, and generally speaking, the American influence and power projection into foreign countries comes out better, smarter, a little bit more honest, and there is a hard domestic firewall against our foreign-facing dirty tricks, criminal penalties against agencies who go against this, civil penalties so that you can sue both the agencies and the NGOs who are sponsored, maybe with treble damages in a bill from Congress, so that if U.S. aid, in whatever form it continues to take, whether that's at the State Department or whether it gets rolled back out into another independent agency, that you could sue the agencies as an individual if they've broken that domestic firewall, so that there's an incentive at the agency on their own budget to tightly oversee these things. There's so much that can be done to bring this in line in a smarter and more moral and frankly more effective way, and that's the task right now.
I think one of the most offensive things to Americans is that all this was being done and all this money was being spent while they were denying money to people that clearly needed it. Mm-hmm. Like particularly victims of natural disasters like Maui.
Right.
The fact that they're spending all this money on those things, and yet they gave those people a one-time check of $770 or something along those lines.
Right. Well, this gets to the fundamental heart of the breach of the social contract that this thing was always set up to do. It was really set up in 1948 when George Kennan created this NSC 10-2, this National Security Council. We completely reoriented the structure of the American empire in 1948 after World War II. In 1947, we passed something called the National Security Act. That's what established the CIA. That's what established the National Security Council, which coordinates all of our foreign-facing empire management work. It renamed the Department of War to the Department of Defense so that it didn't look like we were, acquiring territory by military force, which had just been banned under international law, under the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And so we moved from primarily kinetic warfare into what George Kennan called, just 2 months before he created the plausible deniability doctrine that we live under, he called this organized political warfare. And he has a great memo from April 30th, 1948. It's just 12 days after the CIA's first operation, first time it ever overthrew or rigged the election of a foreign government. This was the April 1948 election in Italy that pitted a pro-Western candidate against a sort of pro-Soviet candidate. And so the U.S. State Department felt it was essential to tip the scales of that election because it showed that the pro-Soviet candidate was winning 60-40. This is all declassified, and all the major people who were involved in that operation have all come out and said this publicly. So this, the CIA, basically we threw together this ramshackle effort to tilt that election by pumping in propaganda, by using charities and churches as fronts to funnel money into the pro-Western political party. We piped in, the Greta Garbo movies and whatnot. We worked with some very very seedy elements of Italian society there. We worked with the mafia, and we worked with mafia-connected unions because these were all assets for the War Department during World War II because Mussolini was cracking down on them. So the War Department had a relationship with these organized criminal networks to serve as a beachhead against Mussolini, but we kept those relationships in order to run this pro-democracy regime change thing. So in 1948, when we established the secrecy doctrine that we now live under, and all these NGOs work under this cover effectively,